two mortal sins, having another god than the Wahhabite God, and smoking. It is designated by them as "the disgraceful kind of drinking." "And how is it with regard to murder and adultery?" asks the Englishman with astonishment on learning these things. "Well, God is gracious and pitiful," answered the old chief. Thus among the ancient Romans there was an idea that a woman could only sin mortally in two ways: by adultery on the one hand, and by wine drinking on the other. Old Cato pretended that kissing among relatives had only been made a custom in order to keep women under control on this point. A kiss meant, "Did her breath smell of wine?" Wives had actually been punished by death who were surprised taking wine, and certainly not merely because women under the influence of wine sometimes unlearned altogether the art of saying no. The Romans were afraid above all things of the orgiastic and Dionysian spirits with which the woman of southern Europe at that time (when wine was still new in Europe) was sometimes visited, as by a monstrous foreignness which subverts the basis of Roman sentiments. It seemed to them treason against Rome as the embodiment of foreignness. 44. The believed motive. However important it may be to know the motives according to which mankind has really acted hitherto, perhaps the belief in this or that motive, and therefore that which mankind has assumed and imagined to be the actual mainspring of its activity hitherto, is something still more essential for the thinker to know. For the eternal happiness and misery of men have always come to them through their belief in this or that motive, not, however, through that which was actually the motive. All about the latter has an interest of the second rank. 45. Epicurus. Yes, I am proud of perceiving the character of Epicurus differently from anyone else perhaps, and of enjoying the happiness of the afternoon of antiquity in all that I hear and read of him. I see his eye gazing out on a broad whitish sea, over the shore rocks on which the sunshine rests, while great and small creatures play in its light, secure and calm like this light and that eye itself. Such happiness could only have been devised by a chronic sufferer, the happiness of an eye before which the sea of existence has become calm, which can no longer tire of gazing at the surface and at the variegated, tender, tremulous skin of this sea. Never previously was there such a moderation of a voluptuousness. 46. Our astonishment. There is a profound and fundamental satisfaction in the fact that science ascertains things that hold their ground, and again furnish the basis for new researches. It could certainly be otherwise. Indeed, we are so much convinced of all the uncertainty and caprice of our judgments, and of the everlasting change of all human laws and conceptions, that we are really astounded how persistently the results of science hold their ground. In earlier times people knew nothing of this changeability of all human things. The custom of morality maintained the belief that the whole inner life of man was bound to iron necessity by eternal fetters. Perhaps people then felt a similar voluptuousness of astonishment when they listened to tales and fairy stories. The wonderful did so much good to those men, who might well get tired sometimes of the regular and the eternal, to leave the ground for once, to soar, to stray, to be mad. That belonged to the paradise and the revelry of earlier times, while our felicity is like that of the shipwrecked man who has gone ashore, and places himself with both feet on the old firm ground, in astonishment that it does not rock. 47. The suppression of the passions. When one continually prohibits the expression of the passions as something to be left to the "vulgar," the coarser, bourgeois, and peasant natures, that is, when one does not want to suppress the passions themselves, but only their language and demeanour, one nevertheless realises therewith just what one does not want: the suppression of the passions themselves, or at least their weakening and alteration, as in the court of Louis XIV (to cite the most instructive instance), and all that was dependent on it, experienced. The generation that followed, trained in suppressing their expression, no longer possessed the passions themselves, but had a pleasant, superficial, playful disposition in their place: a generation which was so permeated with the incapacity to be ill-mannered, that even an injury was not taken and retaliated except with courteous words. Perhaps our own time furnished the most remarkable counterpart to this period. I see everywhere (in life, the theatre, and not least of all that which is written) satisfaction at all the coarser outbursts and gestures of passion. A certain convention of passionateness is now desired, not only the passion itself. Nevertheless, it will thereby be at last reached, and our posterity will have a genuine savagery, and not merely a formal savagery and unmannerliness. 48. Knowledge of distress. Perhaps there is nothing by which men and periods are so much separated from one another as by the different degrees of knowledge of distress which they possess, distress of the soul as well as of the body. With respect to the latter, owing to the lack of sufficient self-experience, we men of the present day (in spite of our deficiencies and infirmities) are perhaps all of us blunderers and visionaries in comparison with the man of the age of fear, the longest of all ages, when the individual had to protect himself against violence, and for that purpose had to be a man of violence himself. At that time a man went through a long schooling of corporeal tortures and privations, and found even in a certain kind of cruelty towards himself, in a voluntary use of pain, a necessary means for his preservation. At that time a person trained his environment to the endurance of pain. At that time a person willingly inflicted pain, and saw the most frightful things of this kind happening to others, without having any other feeling than for his own security. As regards to the distress of the soul, however, I now look at every man with respect to whether he knows it by experience or by description, whether he still regards it as necessary to stimulate this knowledge, perhaps as an indication of more refined culture, or whether at the bottom of his heart he does not at all believe in the great sorrows of soul, and at the naming of them has in his mind a similar experience as at the naming of great corporeal sufferings, such as toothaches and stomach aches. It is thus, however, that it seems to be with most peoples at present. Owing to the universal inexperience of both kinds of pain, and the comparative rarity of the spectacle of the sufferer, an important consequence results. People now hate pain far more than earlier man did, and calumniate it worse than ever. People nowadays can hardly endure the thought of pain, and make out of it an affair of conscience and a reproach to collective existence. The appearance of pessimistic philosophies is not at all the sign of great and dreadful miseries. For these interrogative marks regard the worth of life appearing in periods when the refinement and alleviation of existence already deem the unavoidable gnat stings of the soul and body as altogether too bloody and wicked, and in the poverty of actual experiences of pain, would now like to make painful general ideas appear